Greetings aspirants, welcome to Narayana IAS, the one-stop destination for UPSC Civil Service examination. In this particular session of Daily News Analysis, we will be doing the theme-based discussion over various aspects of the interim budget that has been presented yesterday by our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. In this theme-based analysis, whatever we do, we will first discuss the basis of this particular requirement called annual financial statement or the budget, and then we will move into certain specific themes as has been mentioned in this particular budget. Before moving ahead into our discussion, dear aspirants, if you like our initiative, please like, share and comment on this particular video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS. We'll move to the first theme, that is the constitutional framework. We are calling this particular budget as interim budget, and this interim budget, as you are calling it, is because of one particular fact. We know that the 5-year term of the incumbent government is ending, and in May we will be going to what is referred to as general elections. So whatever the approval that the government is trying to get for her expenditure purposes and also for raising the income to meet those expenditures is going to be only for these few months, and hence this is referred to as interim budget. And as you clearly see that post the elections, the new government would come in, and as the new government would come in, it will have its own what is referred to as full budget that would be brought before both the houses of parliament. We will now look at the constitutional and legislative framework related to budget, and we will see why the way in which the budget is done in that particular way alone. Look at the three components of the budget. Whenever the budget is presented, there are three things that you will see. One is the annual financial statement as recommended by the Constitution. Number two, the demand for grants, again as recommended by the Constitution. And number three, both of these put together will be brought before the Lok Sabha in the form of what is referred to as finance bill, financing the required expenditure that the government is trying to meet up in these particular months. As you clearly see, apart from these documents which are mandated by the Constitution, within the entire budget statement, you will also see that the documents which are mandated by Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003 will also be incorporated. There are two such important documents which are incorporated. One is the Macroeconomic Framework statement, and the second one is the medium-term fiscal policy strategy statement. Both of these, as I said, are recommended by the FRBM Act 2003. Third one, based on both of these documents, the government will also present some of the documents which are referred to as explanatory documents. One such explanatory document is the expenditure budget. The second such explanatory document is the receipt budget, which is to meet this expenditure budget. And number three, you also have what is referred to as expenditure profile. This has certain important context because of which it is being referred to as expenditure profile. We will look into it once we move ahead with our discussion. And number four, you will also have what is referred to as budget at a glance, which gives you the macro picture of this particular budget. And number five, you also have some of the key features that have been presented in this particular document referred to as key features of budget 2024-2025, that is the interim budget. Along with this, as the government has already presented an annual budget in the previous financial year, it will also come up with what is referred to as implementation of budget announcements during this particular financial year of 2023-2024 and how far this output and outcomes have been achieved. The entire sums related to the annual financial budget or outlays related to the annual financial budget would be hovering around the three important funds which are defined under the constitutional framework. The first such fund is referred to as the Consolidated Fund of India. The second such fund is referred to as the Public Account of India, and the third one is referred to as Contingency Fund of India. We know that Article 266 and Article 267 define three of these particular accounts which are defined within the Constitution. What is this Consolidated Fund of India? Consolidated Fund of India will have all those components wherein whatever the revenues or the taxes that the government is collecting, it will have also the loans which are borrowed by it from RBI, and also it will have the loans which are recovered that it has disbursed to the other entities. All of these put together will be disbursed into what is referred to as Consolidated Fund of India. And this becomes the basis for government's expenditure. This is first thing. There is one particular feature that you have to keep in mind. Any sum that is coming into the Consolidated Fund of India, when the government is putting this sum into the Consolidated Fund of India or disbursing it or taking it for the expenditure purposes, for both of these, we have to keep in mind that it is accountable to the Lok Sabha or the House of People, or in general, it is written that both the houses of Parliament. As it is accountable, it means that it needs to get the approval from the Parliament. On the other hand, you have what is referred to as Public Account of India. As you clearly see that for this particular account, whatever the sum that the government is disbursing into the account and whatever the sum that it is trying to take in terms of meeting up certain expenditure requirements or the transfers, for all these, no such approval is required from both the houses of Parliament. Now, what is the nature of this particular account then? The nature of this particular account can be understood if you look at the origin of this particular account. This account has been created by the British government or the Crown when it was in requirement of one such account to meet the expenditure requirements of the Crown within this particular colonial territory of Indian subcontinent. In order to meet up that account and in order to keep it away from the requirement of accountability towards the people here, it wanted to have this as an instrument. However, in spite of this so-called colonial legacy, government decided that we will have this Public Account of India in order to meet up one particular requirement, that is to raise what is referred to as domestic resources. Domestic resources. This is what, from your syllabus perspective, you refer to it as what is called as domestic resource mobilization as defined in GS3. This domestic resources, once it have been mobilized, they have to be utilized for financing certain developmental requirements. In order to finance this, if it is going into what is referred to as the Consolidated Fund of India, every time you want to put in that money into Consolidated Fund of India and every time you want to take out of this Consolidated Fund of India, you would be facing this issue of requirement of approval from the Parliament. And this requirement of approval might delay some of the expenditure that the government wants to meet up. On the other hand, when these monies that have been disbursed into the Public Account of India, which includes what is referred to as small savings, and most importantly, these small savings constitute the backbone of this Public Account of India. When the maturity period arrives and the individual who has deposited this particular money, and if he is demanding that particular money back upon such maturity, then there should not be any hiccup in order to make sure that this demand is being met. It is this particular reason which has kept the Public Account of India away from this requirement of approval from both the houses of Parliament. Now, as you see here, the small savings and also the cess that the government imposes on taxes in order to meet up certain developmental requirements are part of this particular Public Account of India. From this Public Account of India, government transfers monies in order to implement some of the developmental schemes, particularly the cess amount that it generates by imposing upon the cess on the taxes that we pay. And clearly keep in mind that this cess would be objective specific and it will go towards certain objectives that it wants to meet up. For example, highway development or educational cess you have, which tries to meet up the expenditure requirements of the education sector. So, this objective specific expenditure what you try to meet up using this cess. And as you also see that this money will also be getting transferred. For example, there is a individual who has opened up his account with post office through what is referred to as National Savings Certificate. This is a small savings certificate that he can utilize in order to save money, and government is trying to raise these domestic resources and it will be using for the developmental purposes. Upon utility, once this maturity period arrives, as we have already seen, this has to be transferred to that individual. This hence includes those transfers. Along with that, there are few transfers that the government does through this Public Account of India. For example, the government has imposed what is called as cess, which is referred to as compensation cess to meet up the GST requirements of the states. This also gets transferred to the respective states on the basis of certain devised formula. On the other hand, from public account of India, particularly the union government takes what is referred to as loans. It borrows from this particular account. What is the nature of these borrowings? How it is impacting our macroeconomic situation? All this we will look at in the next theme. So for now, this is the way in which all these accounts work. There is third account that you have to focus upon. That is referred to as the contingency fund of India, from where the government can draw monies upon in order to meet up certain contingencies. And as of now, as per this particular budget, which also is true with respect to the previous budget, this contingency fund of India has been kept at this value of 30,000 crores, wherein 40% would be from the Department of Expenditure, and also the 60% of this component would be coming from the Department of Economic Affairs. These are the three funds which try to maintain the government's outlays with regard to this annual financial statement. This is the first thing that we have to know. The second aspect is, as you clearly see, there are three such documents that the Constitution is mandating. First one is the annual financial statement. As per Article 112 of the Indian Constitution, the annual financial statement, which is showing separately the statement of revenue and the statement of expenditure, must be submitted to both the houses of parliament. This is first one. Second one, this has to be done on every year basis, meaning year on year, the executive must get approval from the parliament in order to meet up such resource requirements and expenditure requirements. Third one, as we have already seen, that Article 266, Article 266A and Article 267, which try to deal with three of those accounts, are the basis for the entire outlays that the government is trying to allocate within this annual financial statement. On the other hand, we also have two other requirements, that is the budget estimates of 2024-2025, revised estimates of the 2023-2024, alongside the actual estimates of the 2022-2023 financial year. Three of these have been presented in this particular annual financial statement, which is referred to as, again, interim budget. As you clearly see here, the budgetary document will have three important separate data. One data is related to the budget estimate of the upcoming financial year, the revised estimate of the previous financial year, which is nearing its completion, and the actual estimates of the financial year which has completed 2 years back, that is 2020 to 2023. As you see, apart from this, clearly Article 150 of the Constitution, which deals with some of the functions of what is referred to as Comptroller Auditor General of India, that has been defined in Article 148. Whatever the disbursements that the government is making through this annual financial statement has to be made into two components. One component is referred to as charged component, and the other one is referred to as the made component. This distinction has to be made because whatever the component that is getting included or outlays that are getting included under this charged component, which in terms of Constitution we may refer to as charged expenditure by the government, includes all that expenditure which have to be mandatorily be there in order to meet up the expenses of various constitutional offices. And you clearly know that charged expenditure is one of the bases to maintain the independence of all these constitutional bodies and offices. Independence of all the constitutional bodies and offices, it should not be subjected to any kind of voting. That is the major distinction we have to keep in mind. On the other hand, whatever has been included in this so-called made expenditure must be subjected to voting, and this voting hence will be in the form of parliamentary approval towards whatever the outlays that the government has presented to meet up the expenditure of various departments, various ministries, and also various other sub-schemes and schemes that the government is implementing. This makes up in a gist three fundamental things. One, the annual financial statement includes the separate accounts related to the revenue and expenditure, that is income and expenditure. Second, it also includes the data related to not only the budget estimates of the upcoming or ensuing financial year, it also includes the revised estimates of the previous financial year and actual estimates of the financial year that has ended 2 years back. Third, it also includes as two separate components what is the expenditure which is being coming under made expenditure, which will be subjected to voting on the floor of the Lok Sabha. On the other hand, you have what is referred to as charged expenditure, which should not be subjected to any kind of voting in order to make sure that independence of these offices, that is the financial independence of these offices, is maintained. This is the first thing. The second component, as you clearly know, is in the form of demands for grants. So whatever has been presented in annual financial statement will be in the form of demands for grants that the various ministries, departments and other offices which present in terms of their requirements, that is expenditure requirements to finance ministry. It is this which will be presented in the form of demands for grants under Article 113. So these are clearly the estimates of expenditure that have to be subjected to voting and get the approval from the Parliament. Third, you have what is referred to as finance bill. The annual finance statement is in fact a money bill, and this money bill as defined in Article 110 will be presented in the form of finance bill. How will you financing all these expenditure requirements? The finance bill, as such as the name itself indicates, is to raise those income or resources in order to meet the expenditure requirements that you have outlaid in the demand for grants. So in this particular money bill, you clearly know that as there is involvement of imposition, or there might be some abolition, or there might be certain remission, or there might be certain alteration, or even the regulation of taxes that is required to be done. And as you are doing this and as you are making this to happen to disbursed into the Consolidated Fund of India, this has to be done only on the basis of approval from the Parliament. Hence, this finance bill, as defined as part of the annual financial statement, must be subjected to the parliamentary scrutiny. More importantly, we know that in 2003, the government has come up with this Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act, wherein this act is trying to mandate some of the principles of financial prudence. In order to maintain this financial prudence, by which the government wants to make sure that there is macroeconomic stability through this instrument of budget, there are two fundamental documents that it mandates. One is the Macroeconomic Framework statement, which talks about the stability of the economy in the current scenario and how it is going to translate into stability for the future also. On the other hand, you have this document of medium-term fiscal policy and fiscal policy strategy, which tries to mention about the fiscal consolidation that the government has to make sure, whereby the rationalization of expenditure, either in the form of subsidies or otherwise, can be made sure of. So, on the one hand, this macroeconomic framework statement is trying to talk about those macroeconomic indicators that we have, either in the form of the GDP growth rate, or in the form of fiscal balance, or in the form of even the external sector balance is what it will be dealing with. On the other hand, the medium-term fiscal policy statement and medium-term fiscal policy strategy, both of these would be talking about the deficits and the debt part of the government, the budget. The deficit, as you clearly know, is referred to as flow variable because it will be varying over time. On the other hand, in order to meet up this particular deficit, you will be raising money that has clearly been given as an estimate in this particular document, and this is referred to as stock variable. How they vary will have an impact on macroeconomic stability, and how they vary will also have impact on the efforts towards fiscal consolidation. And lastly, as you have already seen that there are certain explanatory documents. One such explanatory document is referred to as Expenditure Budget. Within this, it is trying to explain what is the outlay for center's expenditure and what is the outlay in the form of center's transfers to some other entities for that particular expenditure. The center's expenditure constitutes the establishment expenditure, that is the bureaucracy which is functioning and the otherwise. Second, the central sector schemes that the government implements for which the expenditure has to be met with. And third, expenditure on various central public sector undertakings and the autonomous bodies. On the other hand, these transfers would go in the form of centrally sponsored schemes and also the transfers that the Finance Commission has already recommended as part of the vertical devolution to various states. And three, there are other such transfers that the government also make, which are probably in the form of the conditional transfers to states in order to meet up certain requirements that the government of India mandates. Along with this particular requirement, there is also what is referred to as receipt budget, which is mentioned as another explanatory document. In this receipt budget, it is talking about the tax revenue that the government is receiving, both direct and indirect. Second, it is talking about the non-tax revenue receipts. And the third, other such receipts which are referred to as the capital receipts. Along with this, it is also talking about the statement of revenue impact of tax incentives that the government has provided under the central tax system that it has at present. Lastly, clearly as you see, there is something referred to as expenditure plan. In this expenditure plan, the government has what is referred to as specific budgeting expenditure, referred to as gender budgeting. Various ministries and various departments would be separately mentioning this particular outlays referred to as gender budgeting. Second, similar such separate outlays are there for even the welfare of children. The welfare of children. Third, there are in fact subplans for both scheduled castes and scheduled tribes which are mentioned within this expenditure plan. They are specifically targeted to these particular vulnerable groups. Hence, this has been separately mentioned. There is one last thing that we have to keep in mind. You have to recall that there is something referred to as expenditure profile. This expenditure profile is separately mentioned in order to make sure that the reality of merger of both plan and non-plan expenditure that government used to have earlier during the times of this plan and commission is being reflected through this particular document. I repeat, the expenditure profile that the government showcases in this particular documents or list of documents that it has to showcase as part of an financial statement effort. This expenditure profile is showing you the expenditure of the government of India by merging what is referred to as plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure that it used to have earlier during the times of planning commission. As you clearly know that this has been replaced by Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog comes up with what is referred to as perspective plan for medium term and long term. In order to meet up this perspective plan, you cannot have this distinction of plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure. So all the expenditure that you are trying to incur is in the form of planned expenditure alone. It is this major change which is the government of India has done in 2016-17 is what being reflected in this expenditure profile. We are done with the theme 1 where we have discussed the constitutional framework and the FRBM related requirements with regard to this annual financial statement or budget. We will move to the next theme now. Moving to the next theme, we will do this theme of macroeconomic framework. This theme has ranked in the second position in our discussion because of the fact that this establishes one fundamental fact, that our economy is showcasing what is called as stability. The long-term growth would be possible, the economic development in the long term would be possible only when the macroeconomic indicators are showcasing what is referred to as stability for this entire period. In spite of some of the short-term fluctuations that might be there with respect to economy and its functioning, the long-term stability must be ensured, and this would be visible in the some of the indicators that we may look at. As you see here in this particular indicators, one is the growth rate that we can look at and the projected potential for the economy that we can look at. The second one is various other possibilities that you see in the components of measurement of national income. If you are using expenditure, or if you are using the income, or if you are using the production methods, and whatever the components you have in these particular methods, and if they show that robustness and if they show that resilience and stability, then by and large we may assume that the economy is also in stable condition. As you see in this particular slide, the global trends have to be mentioned, as this particular statement is mentioning, in order to establish that in spite of such global headwinds, Indian economy is posited in a resilient manner. As you clearly see, the geopolitical uncertainty that has emerged for last few years and certain other disruptions that might be possible in future, given the emergence of new political uncertainties on the world political scene, we may have a situation of global challenges for our economy. On the other hand, we also see that for few economies, global growth is seemingly showing the signs of recovery, which is a good news for us also, given the fact that we are very strongly connected with the external sector. On the other hand, if you look at amidst this global situation, this status of Indian economy in this particular financial year of 2023-2024, then as you clearly see, it has maintained what is referred to as macroeconomic fundamentals, which are stable and healthy. We will see how this has been considered as healthy. Second, we also saw an emergence of increase in global confidence because of this stability that the macroeconomic fundamentals are showcasing, and hence we also see that IMF has revised our growth to certain higher level. And three, we also see that the real GDP in the first half of the previous financial year has registered highest growth rate amongst many major economies. And lastly, the reason why all these are happening, as I was already stating, that the components of the national income, whether you are using production method or expenditure method, all these components were showing a robustness in terms of their growth, be it consumption, be it investment, be it capital expenditure, or be it the performance of various sectors, excluding agriculture. On the other hand, when you look at the Indian economy in this 2023-2024, on the basis of, for example, expenditure method, when you look at the situation of the economy, the expenditure method, as you know, will have the components of primarily private final consumption expenditure. In this private final consumption expenditure, as it is pushing the GDP up by driving the demand, as you see in this particular graph, sustainably for last few years, we are able to maintain that sustainable levels of private final consumption expenditure. Even now, it is roughly hovering at 60% of the GDP. Second, we also have this trend of increasing gross fixed capital formation to GDP, as we state in the form of capital formation to GDP ratio. Even in this particular respect, if you see that unlike whatever the situation you had previously, as this particular statement states, where even though there was a credit boom and even though there was an investment boom, we see that this has led to the mounting of bad debts for the financial sector and also bad balance sheets for the corporate sector. And this had been repaired over a long period of time, and since 2021-2022 financial year onwards, we see that the capital formation is showing a healthy trend. As of now, it is at roughly 30% of the GDP, and yet this is going to prove vital for our sustainable growth in the future. This is what it is projecting. And in order to see the same phenomenon from the sectoral economy point of view, where you are taking into consideration primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector, keeping in view both secondary and tertiary sector, we see that both of them are performing well. And when you see this through this high frequency indicator called Purchasing Manufacturers Index, be it for industry or be it for services, it is showing a healthy trend. Alongside, you also see that the index of industrial production and particularly index of core industries, those 8 core industries that you have, be it coal, be it electricity, be it petroleum or any other such industry, they are showing their healthy trend, and this healthy trend seemingly is pushing our potential growth further. On the other hand, from the perspective of taxation and revenue, wherein this can become vital in terms of revenue expenditure and also push for capital expenditure by the government, we see that there is buoyancy in revenue collection. We know this on the basis of the ratio that we have in order to calculate this, wherein the direct tax to nominal GDP ratio is also showing a healthy trend. Having said this, we have a concern with respect to this particular macroeconomic stability that we are showcasing, whereby the focus had to be sustainably higher on these particular sectors. One is the agriculture sector, which has consistently slowed down in terms of its growth, and here you see that it has slowed down to 1.8%. From the levels of 4% to 1.8%, it has fallen. And even though the reasoning has been shown here as the El Nino for this particular financial year, the reasoning seemed to be a wider in terms of its scale and structure, and hence a sustainable way of addressing these distortions in agriculture must happen. Second, we see that manufacturing is healthily placed and service sector was also placed in a healthy way. However, as it has shown certain slowdown in its growth rate because of the geopolitical uncertainties, and particularly which has hampered the trade and some of the contact-based services that you see in this services sector. In spite of this, overall, this macroeconomic statement projects that Indian economy is placed at a stable and healthy level, and it is poised to have higher and sustainable growth rates for the future. On the other hand, you also see that external sector seemingly is stable in spite of global headwinds. We know that in the previous financial year, the export sector, particularly the merchandise sector, has experienced the highest growth rate possible by growing more than $400 billion for the first time, and even in this particular financial year, it is showing such trends. Number two, we also see simultaneously that within this external sector, which is calculated on the basis of balance of payments, as you know, and which has what is referred to as current account and capital account, and within this current account, we know that the exports and imports would fall along with what is referred to as the remittances. This is keeping the Indian economy resilient. As you see here, there is reduction in import, particularly on the basis of reduction in imports pertaining to the oil and natural gas, given the global uncertainties and global conflicting situations due to geopolitical tensions. And then you also see, because of that, there is an easing of fuel price, because of which the import burden has fallen. On the other hand, we also see that the services trade has shown some sort of what is referred to as resilience in terms of export, and then reduced the services import. And both of these has brought down the current account deficit from 2.9% of the GDP to 1% of GDP in the first half of the previous financial year. It is this which is being translated into macroeconomic stability. On the other hand, we must also keep in mind that remittances are robust and which are registered in terms of highest possible remittances, which is over and above $100 billion in this particular financial year. For the first time, we have achieved it, and this is more than what you are getting both in terms of FDI and also in terms of the external developmental assistance. On the other hand, even from the short-term investments that you are getting in the form of what is referred to as foreign portfolio investment, wherein this investment would be there when there is risk aversion within the economy, and this investment would be taken off when there is higher risk in the economy, have also shown a net inflow of $31.7 billion in the previous financial year in its first half, which is again another healthy trend. All these pertain to the stability of the Indian economy. Moreover, if you look at the inflation as another macroeconomic indicator, you clearly see that in spite of the possibility of fuel price shock and food price shock, by and large, the inflation, particularly the retail inflation, has remained at sustainably manageable levels, and it is being kept within this targeted zone of 4 to 6% as part of inflation targeting framework, even though RBI has clearly pointed out that it would not be changing the interest rates, it would not be cutting down the interest rates until the inflation is strongly brought down to the levels of 4% pertaining to consumer price index. On the other hand, you also see that retail inflation being stable, notified within the tolerance band of 2 to 6%, we clearly can say that the growth that we are achieving now is occurring at the levels of largely price stability. Remember, we have to see all this in long-term scenario. rather than in the short-term scenario, wherein in the short-term scenario, fluctuations are normal. On the other hand, all this inflationary pattern, as you see, is also translating into better structure and sustainable structure in terms of the finances. So, as the inflation is in the manageable levels, you see that savings would be occurring in a better way, wherein the deposits would be increasing. And the increase in deposits is also being showcased in terms of decline in the gross NPAs for the scheduled commercial banks. On the other hand, we also see that as this gross NPA is brought down to the levels of 3.2% at the end of September 2023, we see that even the capital to risk-weighted assets ratio, CRAR, of these scheduled commercial banks has improved to much better levels than the mandated levels at nearly 12%. So, you have it at 16.8%, which clearly says that the balance sheet of the even financial sector alongside the corporate sector are in good shape. All these point out to the macroeconomic stability we have, and hence, as you see in the next theme that we discuss, that the growth rate that we are projecting for the next few years is also at sustainably high levels.